Hello and welcome to the big picture. As much heat and dust keeps flying around in the election campaign and the UPA government's term is coming to an end, there is some good news regarding the economy. According to a World Bank Group report, India has become the third largest economy in purchasing power parity, pipping Japan. India, which was 10th largest economy in 2005, when the same group had come out with a report, has climbed an impressive 7 places up. This news coming as it does amid the elections, however, may be too late for anyone to take advantage of. However, what does this mean to the country and economy in the long run? And how will it help the new government in managing the economy? And what does it mean for the common man? We will discuss all this today with Santosh Mehrotra, Director General Institute of Applied Manpower Research, Dr. Praveen Jha, Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the JNU, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Member, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Welcome to all of you. Santosh, what does this mean? Is it something big in terms of how the world will look at us, what will happen to our own economy, and in general, terms of the atmosphere in this country as far as the economy is concerned?
Well, certainly it is big. Since
climbing
moved,
moving from 10th place to 3rd place.
I think that's big. By any definition, that's big, climbing from 10th to 3rd. And internationally, it means a lot. But domestically, I'm not so sure it's going to count very much, except perhaps a few economists, and it'll lead to some drawing room conversation about our being the 3rd largest economy. Other than that, we've got massive challenges ahead. And we've got to really focus on that, because let's not forget that China in 2005, its per capita income in PPP terms was 45% of the US. It was 87% of the US. It has already climbed to 100% of that. We were some 17%, and we've climbed to 35% of the US GDP per capita.
37%. We were 18.9%, now 37%.
Correct, or something. Yes. So we've also done well, but the fact remains that we have massive challenges ahead, and we really must never stop comparing ourselves to China for the following reason, because China is a large economy like us, very popular, the population, and also their experience is being unprecedented in the history of the world in terms of having maintained 10% per annum growth rate for 20 odd years. So, that's what we've got to learn to match.
We have a long way to go still.
Absolutely.
That's what you say.
Absolutely.
Praveen, purchasing power parity, that's what this is about. The 3rd largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. What does it mean?
Basically, there is this argument that if you do comparisons either in terms of exchange rate with major currencies or in terms of domestic currencies, both can be very misleading for very obvious reasons. Right. And that is why this argument that it is good to go along with some common kind of measure by which you can do this comparison. Now, purchasing power parity in itself is a deeply contentious issue, because what is the basket that you use, basket of goods and services, to doing this comparison is something which can be deeply contentious for obvious reasons. Nonetheless, given the fact that however flawed it may be, there is something that you have on the table which we have been trying now for good 25-30 years now, and then you do some comparisons. So in spite of all the problems there, at least it gives you some ideas, and in that respect, surely this is something which many would consider good news. A jump of 7 places in about 6 years or so, 7 years. 6 years, in fact 2005 and 2011. Right? So certainly, many would consider that this is something which is good news. But I think instead of looking at the size of the economy, it is much more, let's say, meaningful to look at per capita changes, developments, and the ranking there. And if you look at that ranking, we continue to be out of 199 countries for which there is data, we are at 127 as per this study.
Yes.
Right? and we are roughly half of the per capita income of China. Right? So that may be a better indicator of what the
Where we
progress
stand actually.
exactly where we stand, and in terms of who we should be comparing ourselves with. So in that sense, I mean, I completely take Santosh's point that we should be sort of keeping a good eye on China and trying to see how we are performing with respect to China, because that is a good comparator in some sense. So yes, so that is what I would say
Bhanumurthy,
on that.
how would you look at this?
Well, see, this PPP terms has a very, very limited use, largely for international comparisons. And as the panelists are saying, I think we have many other issues that needs to be compared.
That's what, as Praveen was pointing out,
Yes.
127th in per capita GDP.
Well, I mean, if you look at the
Out
China,
of 199 countries.
if you look at China, it is 99. I mean,
China is?
99.
China is 99,
So
we are
not
127.
we are not very far from
Well,
China
okay.
in that sense. I think we are growing nations. I think we if you continue to grow at this level, if the China continues to grow at this level, even in GDP per capita terms also may see a faster improvement because not just the output. I think even if you look at the population growth, there is a deceleration in China.
Which is not happening here.
Yeah, I mean even in India it is happening. I mean right now the
Not to
population
the extent
growth
that
rate
it's
is less
happening
than
in China.
2. I mean not like in China of course, and there are improvements in both the ways, output as well as population. So if this kind of trend continues, we might see some kind of improvements in the future. But at the same time, I would like to caution. Even the World Bank itself says these 2011 numbers are not really comparable per se with 2005 because there is a huge change in the methodology. So I think we need to be slightly cautious. It has a very limited use for the policy purpose. Of course, this good news is that in terms of size of output, we are third in the world. But there are lots of issues I think that needs to be kept in mind before celebrating.
Methodology, Santosh, what has been the change in methodologies that that we need to take note of?
If I remember
has there
correctly,
been such
it's the
a
price.
major change in methodologies?
It's not. I don't believe it's a change in methodology. It's a change in the base year for which the price has been taken. Am I right, Bhanu? I mean,
well, there are changes both in the coverage of output and also in terms of prices.
okay. So, yeah, but I think
No, but my sense is that would not make a
Yes.
very significant difference.
that's what I was about to say, that's not going to make that much of a difference because after all, now you're comparing like with like. Everyone's been calculated in 2011 on the same methodology, in 2005 on the same methodology. So if we are only comparing ranks, then what this is reflecting is that between 2005 and 2011, when we were experiencing on average at least 8.4% growth per annum, clearly that's what this is a reflection of. That's how we've done seven places in terms of rank.
No, to the extent that we have some news, that news is true and genuine.
Yes.
Let's
See,
not
one of the things which is being said
Yes.
is that prices have determined this also to a great extent, and then the prices in this country have been more or less stable, in comparison to other countries. Would you say that is one of the
No, but actually,
factors?
if you look at the prices, I mean, it says that India's price level indices is ranking 171, in the sense against Switzerland 209.6, which is the first. In a sense, even after high inflation regime for 5 years, they say that in compared to world,
Yes.
India's price out of 100, it is only 40%.
Right.
So we still have a low inflationary regime
Right.
Compared to the
Compared to what's happening internationally.
International.
Praveen,
Also,
this
if
is, interestingly, let us bring a little bit of politics inside this. Here is a government which is facing huge anti-incumbency in this election. It's not been able to explain its its performance or even its progress it has been able to make. These kind of reports which we are getting from international sources say that they have actually managed the economy quite well in comparison to other countries. But this doesn't get reflected in at least in the campaign discourse, the election discourse anywhere.
I think it's this news is a bit late and in some ways a bit too little.
Too little.
Number one. In any case, the comparison is between 2005 and 2011. Now, the worst inflationary episode, and which have really hit the masses,
happened after 2011.
The period after that.
Okay.
So, and that is, I think, if you want me to put my finger on one thing which has made the electorate, our population at large, very angry,
Yes.
it is inflation.
And this is post-2011 inflation.
And that is post-2011 inflation.
So
right?
this actually
Right.
doesn't reflect what happened
Exactly.
in post-2011.
But on the other hand, at least it could have taken some wind out of the opposition attack on Congress that look, they have not managed the economy well and so on for the entire period. As you know, many spokespersons have been claiming. So in that sense, had it come earlier, this report, it probably would have helped Congress marginally in terms of setting the discourse.
Bhanumurthy, would you agree with that?
Well,
Or you think
I think there's no dispute that inflation has become a very major issue, at least in terms of politics. But we need to really understand what are the drivers of inflation. I think that's a
we have had this discussion
completely different debate one can have.
Yeah.
But on the face of it, I think it shows that a government could not manage inflation, but I disagree with that. Maybe we can discuss later.
You have been disagreeing with that. You have had always a different point of view on that.
Yes.
Santosh, would you say that, would you agree with Praveen that it has come a little late and too little?
Well,
Politically, I know you are not very comfortable talking in political terms.
Well, let's face the facts that in some ways there are many achievements between the period 2004-5 and 2000 and since then that the government can take credit for, and it has not been taking credit for it. I mean, I could reel off a whole series.
Right.
Just the very fact that 140 million people came out of poverty between 2004-5 and 2011-12 is a huge achievement, because never in the history of our country had we seen a massive decline in absolute terms in the numbers of the poor. This is point one. And that the people, and obviously there was a great density of population around the poverty line, because as they tipped over, they started consuming new products. And when they started consuming new products, simple consumer products, it generated demand, which generated jobs.
Right.
So, in the most recent period between 2009-10 and 2011-12, for which we have data on jobs, industrial jobs, construction jobs, services jobs grew by a phenomenal rate. And which were the kinds of firms which were producing these products? Small firms, really tiny firms, which generated the jobs and generated the products which were being consumed by these newly non-poor. So there is a beautiful dynamic now in place. So even though the growth rate has declined, the fact of the matter is, if the employment elasticity of output, meaning the number of jobs generated for every unit of output has risen, that's a beautiful dynamic, and it can be sustained over a period of time. Because let's not forget that between 2004-5 and 2011-12, 7.5 million new jobs in industry and services were being generated, as many as were being generated in the preceding 5 years, meaning 1999-2000 to 2004-5. Now, why is the 7.5 million per annum number so important? Because in recent years, the numbers joining the labor force has come down. Meaning, it's not that it is not increasing. Of course it is increasing, but it is increasing at a slowing rate. And then over this period, even people who were leaving agriculture got absorbed, because never in the history of our country did people leave agriculture in absolute terms. There was a decline in the numbers in agriculture. So they were leaving only because they were getting alternative employment.
Jobs. It's not that they were becoming. Praveen, will you
on this,
I'm sure you'll have some.
Yeah, on this I have a different take from Santosh.
One thing, you can say that, but I also want you to reflect on how does this this whole third place that we have come to reach means as far as poverty is concerned? He spoke about
you
jobs
see,
and things
on-
like
on-
that. How does it reflect on the poverty situation?
I think poverty estimates are most contentious. If we look at various numbers which are being put in public domain, if there is
World Bank itself says $1 to $1.25 per day.
yes,
That is the poverty line.
Right. And if you go by that, surely the numbers that we have, based on
Santosh talks about.
right, the Tendulkar sort of methodology gives you something which is pretty close to it. So in that sense, there is no problem. But on the other hand, sort of if you look at our own official methodology, there are so many problems with it, and these have been discussed at length. So I, for instance, would not like to take this extent of decline seriously at all. I mean, I think there are serious issues there. We don't have time. We'll probably have to discuss it for a couple of hours.
Santosh can only smile at it.
We'll really need to have a couple of hours to sort of, go through these issues. But that is something on which, there's huge literature, and we know that that's a very, very difficult number. And as regards some of the shift out of agriculture, my sense is that much of it is because of push factors, expulsion. And it's not the case that it necessarily reflects something pretty good. Number three.
His argument is that they have gone out of
they
agriculture
have gone out because
they have found other jobs.
Exactly. They're getting things which are, sort of
better.
positive and so on, better, etc., etc. But if we, sort of go carefully through wage rates and so on, earnings, etc., there are issues there which we need to be very careful about. Number three, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? If you compare 2004, 5 and 9, 10, there is a completely bleak picture on employment front, and suddenly in 1 year, you have this massive turnaround. Now that again is something which I have found extremely mysterious.
How do you explain? Let me get Santosh. How do you explain that?
I think everyone should read our latest paper, which will be published very soon. And it says,
he's still publishing,
which is saying very clearly that the number of people joining the labor force has been systematically declining. So while it is true that fewer jobs were created between 2004, 5 and 9, 10, especially in manufacturing, there was a decline. So Praveen is absolutely spot on in that regard. But the interesting point, I think, is that despite the fact that there was a decline from 55 million to 52 million, a 3 million decline over that period in manufacturing, overall, when you take the whole period into account, then you...
Yes, but may I just add one thing here? Much of the whatever jobs have been created is in the construction sector.
Right.
Almost 60% plus. Right?
That's not strictly true, Praveen.
And almost 60%, right? And if you look at what has driven it, of course, it was because of a few public sector programs in urban areas, but also equally importantly in rural areas, Indira Awas Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, etc. So, in terms of the dynamic, it's a very fragile thing that we are really talking about.
How long
must
can
these
with
continue?
all due respect.
Yeah, please.
Yes, please, please.
I think there were, first of all, let me say that manufacturing has seen an increase between 9, 10 and 11, 12 of 9 million. Services has seen an increase of 11 million over that same period. But let me address the construction issue that Praveen raised. Let's just put the facts on the table. What the numbers were of those who got jobs in construction. Then in 2000, there were 17 million people in construction. There were 26 million in 2004-5, but that went up to 50 million by 2011-12. That's a doubling. That's a doubling. So first of all, now.
So it proves his point that it is mostly in the construction.
No, but I began by telling you that it was there's 9 million in manufacturing, but and also in services there have been a total of about 20 million over the period from 4 to 5 now. It's true that some 50% possibly are in construction. Now, I was going to take issue only with what he believes are the drivers of construction employment. I believe that there are 3 sets of drivers of construction employment, and that is likely to be sustained is what I'm arguing. First, Praveen is absolutely right. There were rural programs driven by the government. There was the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. So good quality roads were built throughout the country, rural roads. Second, there was Manrega. And third, there was Indira Awas Yojana, so for the poor, rural housing. Now, in addition, I'm still here looking at sort of rural areas and housing, real estate. You travel to any part of UP, any part of Bihar today, and you'll be surprised at the change between 5 years ago and today in the following sense. Hardly any house today, except in the Maoist areas, will you find it's a kacha house. They are all pakka houses. You walk through any Mufassil town main street, and every second shop is a construction material related shop.
All, that's a normal thing.
No, so hold on. So that's the rural construction boom. Second,
I wouldn't say the same thing. I agree with you as far as pakka houses are concerned. I wouldn't say the same thing about roads. I'm just back from UP last week, and by the way, Raebareli, Amethi roads are in terrible shape.
well, hold on. So what roads are those? Those are the roads that are built by the state government and maintained by the state government. I'm talking about the rural, meaning that off the national highway.
Okay.
But it goes beyond that. I need to finish my argument about the construction.
I know,
Very
he's
quickly.
getting left out on this.
Very quickly. You see, there was an increase of infrastructure investment in the country which went from 4% of GDP in the first year of the 11th plan, 2007, to some 7.5% in the last year of the 11th plan. So there's the second dimension of the construction employment is the infrastructure investment, which is driven both by the public sector as well as the private sector. So, we need to keep both these things in mind.
No, all these things which he's talking about has the increase in employment, and that has helped us reach this third position.
Sir, I think just to add on this employment argument, I have a couple of issues which I thought I should highlight. In terms of rural employment, I think what they're saying is correct in a sense that MGNREGA did bring in substantial change in the way the employment opportunities have been created, because I've been doing some work on a couple of states. Even for NREGA job which is linked to CPI rural prices, there's not much of demand in the sense that
in many states there
are some states where people are preferring to go for the informal, non-farm activities, and non-farm activities seems to be rising as pointing out. So in a sense, the MGNREGA has become a benchmark, at least the
as far as
bottom
the
line.
Wages are concerned.
Wages as well as even employment, because there's not much demand for that.
Right.
If you see the allocation.
Actually, the fact that the NREGA, there is no demand or there is less demand for NREGA is good news. It's not bad
that's
news.
exactly. That's exactly. So the allocation is coming down over a period of time. And in terms of this manufacturing versus service employment, unfortunately, what I understand from the literature is that the way this employment is estimated or calculated seems to be slightly flawed. If you look at the manufacturing, there was 30-40% of activities from the manufacturing has been shifted to service sector. So if you really want to understand the employment trends in the manufacturing as well as services, I think one may have to really look at input-output tables rather than the ASI or NSS state. So if you can adjust some of the services which are shifted from manufacturing to service sector, then I don't see the decline in the manufacturing sector employment over a period of time.
As something which needs to be worried about.
Yes.
That's an interesting argument.
I agree with you. This is something which needs to be examined more closely. I have not done that, so I would not like to stick my neck out on that. Nonetheless, fact of the matter is that whether we are looking at manufacturing or services, let's say productive sectors in general, and if you look at services, etc., you sort of add all these together and put construction on the other side. Right? And my sense is that it has been construction which has been driving whatever sort of increase in employment that has been reported in basically just about 1 year. Effectively, if you're looking at 4, 5, 9, 10, it's more or less jobless growth. Santosh had written about that. Everybody talked about it, and so on and so forth.
I doubt it.
That is something which is a bit of a problem for me even now. This massive.
How did it happen in 1 year?
How did it happen in 1 year is something which is an issue that we need to talk about.
But I think the
but
point is,
we'll have to wait for another paper from.
The paper is out. The paper has gone to EPW.
No, the other thing, what you said in terms of some of the implications of it. I think there is something positive about it. If you look at, for instance, what's happening to India's share in the global,
yeah.
let's say, investment.
Right.
China is 27% of the total global investment. India does sort of poorly compared to China. It's just about 7%, right? US
6.7%.
yeah, just about 7%. US is about 13% or so, right? So I think one needs to sort of contextualize India
No,
experience.
that's a very interesting.
I think I need to look at savings rate rather than investment rate.
Bhanumurthy, one of the things which is being written today, or when they are talking of this, where we are, is that world is becoming a more equal place. Would you agree with that? Well, from the figures what you were just quoting,
Right.
world is Santosh.
I would go along with
No,
that. Well, if you were to compare per capita income as a whole of a country vis-a-vis if the benchmark is the US, but ideally that's not the best way of comparing inequality. The best way of comparing is actually you say you take the entire population of the world and see what's happened to the distribution of income.
In fact, as of now, we are only talking of select countries.
Select.
And
That's
as regards these select countries,
that's the other point.
certainly there is an kind of
There's an improvement.
some closing in. Certainly.
Yeah, I think
But,
in terms of look at the inequality. I think what they say, the report is saying that compared to 2005 is slightly improved, but I think it still have huge.
We still have
inequality.
some way to go. One more important thing before we need to end. How sustainable are this? Now we are in the third position. You think we'll be able to sustain that position for a length of time, or is there a danger of our slipping again?
My sense is that in the immediate foreseeable future, this will continue, because if you look at what the pattern has been during the last 5-7 years, post that crisis phase, there are certain kinds of difficulties which continue to confront OECD countries, most of them Europe, US, etc. And as regards China and India, they continue to be number one and number two in terms of growth rates. And that has been the story now for 35 years or so.
Right.
So even in this difficult phase, the story has continued. And my sense is that in the immediate foreseeable future, in terms of simply growth rates, this story will continue.
This story will continue.
I think we need to focus on 127 rather than 3. I think
per capita GDP.
That is my.
Absolutely. So is there a possibility that we may climb higher or climb lower in that per capita?
If we continue
from 127 to say, can we get below 100 any time in future?
If you
Anytime
have this,
soon.
if you focus more on the inclusive growth kind of strategy, I don't see any reason why we don't improve on 127.
I'm convinced that we will actually move quite rapidly above 100, perhaps in the next 3 or 4 years as well itself, assuming that we return to 6% growth in this financial year, 7 in the following, 8 in the following. Then we can expect that in 5 years we will be.
As far as retaining our third position in PPP at PPP terms, you think?
Now, mind you would have come down if you include 2012 and 13 numbers.
This is a 2011 number. Okay, I think on that note we need to end. There's some good news on the economic in the economy front, but as people pointed out here, that politically it may not have any benefit for anybody, but for the people of this country there's some good news and hopefully better news in the future. So with that we need to end this show. Thanks to all my guests, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, Bhanumurthy and Praveen Jha. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in Big Picture same time tomorrow.